In this video, using Davinci Resolve, we will learn to work with color. And we're going to work with a number of different clips here, and we'll see what kinds of tricks we can do. So what you need to do is, we're going to start with just one clip here. And this is the clip that we see in this monitor. You can drag through it now. And we'll drag it to the timeline. And there it is. So before you start with working with the color, you want to highlight it. And so whenever you want to work on any clip, you just make sure that you highlight it. And then we're going to move into color. And as soon as you move into color, you get something up here which is called a node. You can delete that node. Let's say you're doing some color work and you decide you don't like it. You can delete it and then just create a new node, or you can create a number of nodes with overlapping different effects that you're putting into the color. Okay, let's start. Let's have a look at the color right here. First of all, before you even start with the color, you can open something called the scopes. And the scopes show you sort of the red, the green, and the blue, and how they are within this particular clip in sort of different levels. And you can work with the lower end of it, make it a little bit brighter. You could work with the top end, make it a little bit darker, and with the mid-range. So here's something we call the lift, and if you want to bring the low end up a little bit, you can lift it, but that takes away some of the contrast. And then you could take the gain, which is the top end, and you can lower it and make everything a little bit darker. You can work with the gamma, which is kind of the mid-range, and you can move the entire thing up and down from darker to lighter. First of all, you can adjust the various levels of value in your work. And now you can begin to actually work with the colors, and you see there's the red, the green, and the blue. So you can move these in a number of ways in each of these sort of the mid-range, the high end, and the bottom end. And you can move them back and forth, or you can actually move this particular little button around, but it's easier working with these numbers, just dragging them back and forth. So we've got, again, that one clip highlighted, and once you look at the scopes and you check those are okay, you can go on to the keyframes. And this is with the keyframes, you can change actually the colors as you move along. But we're going to start with just static colors, and you can very slowly drag one of these along if you like, or you can move these colors along here. So more towards the, away from the red, raise the red. If you want it more purple, you raise the blue, or you lessen the blue. And if you want a little bit more green in there. So you can move along here and just kind of work with the different colors. And if you want to make everything more towards the red, you kind of lessen the green. So we've moved everything kind of to the pink. And then everything will stay kind of pink. Now, you can actually add keyframes to this. So you can change it as you move along. And let's say you want the change to start here. It's not quite as easy as in Premiere, where you just have a little, add a keyframe here. That doesn't quite work. So what you need to do is you either right click and you add a dynamic frame. And with a dynamic frame, it means that the colors will slide into each other. You can either right click or you do command click. So there you have your dynamic frame. And now you can start changing these colors if you like. And then you can create another keyframe here. And once more, you have to create each of these keyframes. So it'd be right click and then add dynamic keyframe. And then you'll see that as you slide this along, you're going to have those colors change. So we'll just keep adding dynamic keyframes and change the color balance of everything. And there you can see the colors shift through there. And you can raise the contrast or you can lower the contrast. You can increase the saturation here. You can actually work with the hue so you can move it in different directions. So there's different ways of changing it. And the Luma mix between dark and light, you can adjust. Now, since I didn't put a keyframe, it would have changed it back at the last keyframe. So here, we're going to add another keyframe, dynamic keyframe. And then we're going to just change it down here, change the hue, change the saturation, maybe the contrast a little bit, and then start changing these. Now, we're going to add one more keyframe here. And let's say you want to switch everything back to 0 again. You can just click on all of these. And it will bring them all back to 0. So let's say at some point you get just completely muddled and you want to start over again. You just click on that node and you delete it, and your original color comes up again. And you get rid of those keyframes. So now we're going to start again, and we're going to not mix it up so much. So you start with one keyframe. And you start with 0. And maybe down here we can just start adjusting the hue. Okay, so then you have to start with a new node. And you do that with an Option S. And here you get a new node. And then you can start, you cannot do any color changes without having the node there. So now here we can work the dynamic color. Another keyframe. We'll start with 0. And then we'll just tilt everything to the red. That's actually a bit more to the purple. So you could work the lower end red, the mid-range a bit more purple, and the high end more blue. So you can kind of separate the colors in that way. So here we begin with a new keyframe. And then we move the cursor ahead to where we want the first change to happen. And then we're going to work with different elements of contrast within here. So we're going to start with the lower end, and we're going to make that a little bit more red. It'll make everything more red. And then the gamma will make a little bit more kind of pink. And then with the gain, which is the higher end, we'll add some blue into it. keyframes here, and now we'll make a new set of dynamic keyframes. Add dynamic keyframe. And then we'll start moving these towards the various colors. And you'll see, depending on whether you use the gain, the gamma, or the lift, and you move them to slightly different colors, it's going to change it different areas into different colors. And move this ahead. Put in another dynamic keyframe. And if you want, you could just bring these back to 0. And you'll see as you move through it, you get one color shift. Now I'm going to add another dynamic frame. And I'm going to take the color picker here, and I'm going to choose one of these colors that will give it quite a narrow frame. And you can make it wider or narrower. And you can work with different areas of luminosity in here. So now that you have a much narrower band, we're going to narrow it a little bit, and I'll show you what happens when you widen it. You can start adding certain colors, but you see that it only happens with some of the colors that were actually within this bandwidth. Now, if you widen the band here, you'll include more colors, or you can narrow the band and you'll have less. Another keyframe. And you see that creates a very narrow bandwidth right there. And then you can see what happens when you play with saturation as you increase one end of this bracket, but you increase the other and it starts disappearing. So it's an interesting idea to play with all of these different bandwidths. You see, when we lower this, we bring the lower end towards the darkers fill in with the red, and as we drag this up, the darks disappear, or they don't change color. And it's the same with the upper end, the bright and the lower end colors. So there's a lot of ways with using the eyedropper and these colors here that you can actually change the color alteration in here. And if you add one more keyframe, you could once again bring it back to 0. So as you scrub through it, you can see all the different changes. Okay, now I want to work with a different set of tools, and we're going to drag another clip onto here, and we're going to highlight it again. And once more you go to color, and a node automatically is created here. So you want to bring the cursor back to the beginning. And now we're going to go into curves. And this is something very similar to working in Premiere and how you work with the curves. So right here near the beginning, we can create once more the dynamic keyframe. And that will start off with just the colors that you see. So we're going to start off just changing some of the colors in here, and then we'll work with the dynamic keyframes. So you can take your color picker, and automatically get the color picker there, and you can choose one of the colors. You could actually move ahead a little bit, so you get these paddles coming into place. You could choose the paddles, and you'll see it makes the marks there, and Here we pick a blue, and you can see it makes some marks there. And what we'll be working with is the hue versus hue, so we can actually change colors from one hue to the next. So we're going to take the yellows and we're going to raise this, and we'll turn those kind of a little bit purple, or you could make them green, it doesn't really matter. And if you want to increase the bandwidth here to include these canoes, you can just stretch it out a little bit, or you could even put the dropper on there and it adds one more point in there. So you see all of the oranges and the reds have turned kind of a green. And then we can turn our blues kind of a purple if we like. And if you want to get rid of a little bit of the sky, you can move this back and forth, and you can include more or less of the blue. So as you cycle through here, you'll see that just those colors have changed. Now I'm going to just erase this, and we're going to move on to the color versus saturation, and then we'll do both together. So let's say we just want to isolate two colors and saturate them and desaturate everything else. So we're going to saturate the yellows there, make them a little bit more intense. And the blues, we'll saturate those. And then every other color we can desaturate by dragging these lines down. And now you see that aside from the blues and the yellows, everything is monochrome. Okay, now we're going to undo that, and I'm going to put keyframes in here. So again, the keyframe is Control-click, add dynamic framework, and I'm just going to move it ahead a little bit, and then we'll do the same things. And then we have to put another dynamic keyframe right here. And then we're going to first work with the hue versus saturation. We're going to saturate that. Doing the same thing, and then we'll move on to the next keyframe, and you're going to see that these will change. So you see everything else is desaturated. And you always need to put another keyframe in there. And then we're going to go move towards the hue versus hue. So we've isolated those. We'll move now to different color here, make those a little bit purple. Then you see if we move back to here, these are desaturated, and the colors will now change. Now we'll move ahead, and we're going to resaturate. And you also realize that you can kind of move these parameters around a little bit to change to make them more inclusive. And I'm going to go to the hue versus saturation and delete that. So now as you go back to here, you'll see it's still saturated, and you move back to this frame and it's still saturated. I'll move ahead a little bit more, and we're going to eliminate these color changes and add different color changes to it. So we'll get rid of that hue versus hue. And then we'll start working with different colors. So we'll work with the green here. We can even drag this over a little bit to change it. So as you scrub through it, you see in places that the green will, depending, you could take a little bit of extra here. You can see the green's changing to blue there. So we need to put the keyframe in here. So now we move this ahead and we'll put in a new keyframe. And we'll desaturate some of the other colors. So the sky will increase the saturation, whereas the vests have a little bit less saturation. And all those colors in between will be more saturated. And you can see here where we changed the colors of the green into other colors. They're also more saturated. And then we put one more keyframe. So we get rid of the hue versus saturation and the hue versus hue, and it is back to normal. And then you see as you move backwards through it, those will change.
Oh, okay, you should ride the front then, if you're getting a little car sick. Maybe in the back.
Yeah, let's go ahead and run.
Berries and berries art.
So now we're going to do one more, and this is actually a very specific one singular treatment to changing the overall look of this video here. So we'll put it on the timeline. And essentially we just want to change the overall tone of this and make it very similar to that video that we saw a couple of weeks ago of Richard Moss in the Congo. So we just click on this. We're not going to use any keyframes. We just go to color. You'll get your node right there. We're going to work with the curves. And we just want all of the green to become a little bit more, well, first we're going to work with the saturation, and we want the saturation of the green to become more. So if you scrub through it, you see you get very nice bright greens. And then we go to the hue versus hue. Once again, we click on the green. We start moving this until all the greens are actually encompassed. Now you'll see as you go through here, everything has kind of a nice mauvey purple color. And at points, if you want other aspects of it changed a little bit more, you can go through this. And you can still make everything a little bit more saturated if you'd like. There you go. And now you can look at it in the edit site. So now, if you decide that you want to speed one of these up, go a little bit faster, so you can just click on it, click R, and this box will come up, and you work with ripple sequence, and then just, you can maybe put 200 in, and it would go twice the speed. There you go. Now, if you'd like to export this, or let's say we want to export the entire timeline here, you just have to mark your out, which would be an O right there, and then it will export everything in here. So you go to this button here called deliver. That's how you export, and you click that, and you click on what you would like it to be, and you want it to be an H.264. That just makes a regular MP4, and you might want to call it color. Before you export it, make sure you click browse, and you put it where you'd like it. I'd like it in tutorial clips right here. I'll call it color 1, and then I go save. And here the resolution is the native resolution, what you'd like. Format MP4 right here. Make sure that you click that, otherwise it'll come out with a QuickTime, which makes it much harder to export them. Okay, then you're ready to go, and it says add to render queue, and this will pop up right here. So you click on that, and you put start render, and this will move through it. And there you go. That's how you export it and how you actually change the speed of something.